So hello and welcome to Comics Craze. My name is Karen Romano and I am the current president of the Book Industry Guild of New York. For those of you who joined us for the social, I hope you enjoyed yourselves. For those of you who didn't, I really hope you join in a little early next month. It's really great fun to just have a chance to network and chat and catch up with old friends and make some new. So tonight we're going to explore that wonderful intersection of narrative and visual art that is the comic book and graphic novel. The growth in scope and nature of these formats has come a very long way since the day that I returned home from school to find that my mother had replaced all of my Superman specials with classic illustrated comic books of the Three Musketeers and Moby Dick, which actually now I wish I still had. We have an amazing panel tonight, which will be moderated by the Guild's own program co-chair, Lauren White-Jackson. Lauren is an award-winning writer and editor. Growing up in Chicago, she spent her summers painting at the DuSable Museum Arts Festival alongside artists such as N. Stephen Harris, Afua Richardson, Ashley A. Woods, and Turtle Onley. At the age of 11, she was featured in an issue of The Red Eye for her art and participation. Lauren quickly fell in love with comics for their ability to broaden horizons and establish a sense of wonder for readers of all ages. She worked as an editor and teacher in Tokyo, Chicago, and New York City, and her favorite stories include The Prince and the Dressmaker by Jen Wang and Fruits Basket by Natsuki Takaya. I will now put this in Lauren's experienced hands and have her introduce you to our panelists. So thank you very much, Lauren. It's over to you.
Thank you. Oh, your openings are always so nice. But hi everyone. It's always incredible to be part of these things, part of these panels. But yes, so I think the reason why we decided to put this together, we're in a very interesting time in the industry, and this specific industry is always full of incredible talent and innovation. Even when faced with a slew of challenges as we had in 2020, it continues to be an immensely resilient force. I think as we witness a rise in the diverse stories and temporary closing of stores and continued relation between print and digital distribution, it's important that we kind of analyze it and celebrate it with our incredible community. And speaking of incredible community, we have great panelists, so I'm very excited. First, we have Chris Arrant, who is a senior editor for Newsarama. It's one of the largest and longest running comics news outlets in North America. He's written about comics and entertainment for Entertainment Weekly, Life Magazine, Cartoon Brew, CBR, and he was featured as a comics expert in USA Today, PBS, and New York Times. We also have Whitney Leopard, who's a senior editor at Random House Graphic, where she edits graphic novels for kids and young adults. She was originally an editor at Boom Studios and has since worked on projects like Lumberjanes, Adventure Time, and Over the Garden Wall, and a personal favorite of mine, The Magic Fish. We have Sara Gómez Woolley, who is an award-winning illustrator and graphic novelist. She's worked on a variety of projects for DC Comics, Image Comics, Scholastic, and Random House. We are very spoiled today with lots of experience. She's recently worked on Wonder Woman Warbringer and was awarded for her ongoing project Los Pequeños, the mostly true memoirs of Esperancito Gomez. And last but not least, we have Joseph Illidge, who's the executive editor for Heavy Metal Magazine. He's worked on the Batman line of comics for DC Entertainment. He's the executive editor for Valiant Entertainment and senior editor for Hair Love Producers, Lion Forge. His first job in the comic book industry was at Milestone Media, who were the groundbreaking creators of the popular superhero Static Shock, which is actually a favorite of mine. But yeah, I'm super excited, as I will probably say multiple times tonight. You'll have to get used to it. But before we get started, I do want to say we'll allow a little bit of time at the end for our audience to have questions. So if you have questions for our viewers, please place them in the Q&A box. And then all the other shenanigans that will definitely happen tonight can go in the chat box. But yeah, to get things started, I would love to kind of open up talking about, of course, the temporary closures of places like conventions and bookstores. As we know, readers are not roaming the bookstores as much as they weren't en masse. They're not spending their times kind of lounging in Barnes and Noble in the Strand, and they're not going to a spaces where they can directly meet artists out of precaution due to COVID. So I think maybe how are creators reaching their readers and what seems to be the most important point of sales? Anyone can go.
I'll hop in on this. A lot of our creators, I know, whenever the pandemic happened, honestly, kind of moved over to a lot of like digitally seamlessly because everyone already was on Twitter, they're already on Instagram, and they were already, building that engagement, and they found ways to continue building that engagement, but then also working with schools and libraries and bookstores to do digital panels and stuff like this. Like Zoom is a great gift to,
Yes.
and other like video chat services have been a great way for people to continue having conversations and continue reaching the audience and making sure the audience is aware of like not only the books that the author is working on, but kind of like what everyone's up to, and gives us a way to connect to people. I'm sitting here like, these are amazing faces, and it's so like, it's not just my face that I see every single day. So like, it's one of those things where uh for the pandemic happening, I am grateful that we were in a place with technology that we were able to then adjust as needed rather quickly, I think, as an industry.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think technology has really allowed us to, in a way, almost value our connection more than perhaps we would have before. So it's very heartwarming to see. And yes, I like seeing all these very nice and new faces that maybe we couldn't have if people were abroad. So yes, that is a great point. I'm wondering, in maybe the stories that you guys are seeing produced, the creators of those stories, maybe are you seeing a lot of activity on Twitter as well as other platforms to kind of reach out to those um, readers to maybe boost their interest, things like that?
I mean, I would say definitely one of the things that happened is a lot of creators really migrated to Patreon.
Mm,
And so Patreon was a way to connect with their existing audience, grow the audience, develop a kind of relationship where audiences would get advanced sneak peeks of things they were developing. Basically, people who were as much interested in them as people as they were in the work that they've done. So that kind of connection became greater. Definitely conversation on social media, I think, was heightened as a result. Any form of communication in the virtual space was increased. And in terms of the conventions, a number of conventions really adapted to a model in which they took the idea of the physical space and they translated it in digital form. So there was a convention recently called VirtuousCon, and VirtuousCon had a setup with a stage and chairs and seating. And then afterwards, there were vendor tables that you could go to in between panels, during panels. So the absence of the in real life situations definitely led a lot of creators to really doggedly pursue ways to maintain their relationships. And the creators actually did it rather quickly. Comic book creators are amazingly adept at pivoting. Part of it is survival, quite frankly, because their relationship to their audience is part of what keeps their whole business going as independent contractors, artists, and writers, but also because, especially for artists, certain formats just lend themselves to more communication. A lot of people left Twitter but did more on Instagram, for example. So the creators have just been really amazingly quick to adapt and change their behavior to stay in contact.
yeah, no, that's a great answer. Thank you. I think it's interesting, especially with conventions, because it seems as though you kind of need to be there when you're thinking of a convention because you're going to different events. There's an audience there. Maybe one of the reasons that someone goes to that convention is specifically to shake someone's hand because they're a big fan, things like that. I think seeing a lot of that innovation, and the adaptability is super apparent during these times. So yes, there's another thing, moving on to print and digital, that I think is going on right now. I think there's an idea that either you start in print and you move to digital, or it has to be two separate kind of entities, when in reality, I think it's really one big circle, and they're kind of feeding into each other. One thing the audience might know of or may not is Homestuck. Homestuck was originally a really big webcomic phenomenon in 2009. Recently, they paired with Simon & Schuster, or the creator paired with Simon & Schuster to publish it in a book series, so going backwards from digital to print. I'm wondering if we're seeing kind of examples of print feeding into digital, or the other way, digital feeding into print in the community as a whole.
I think it's not really, well, it is a feeding into one or another, but I think web is like online comics are finally not seen as a lesser medium, a medium more like a training ground, but it's kind of a different space, kind of like there is different kinds of bookstores, there's different kinds of comic stores, and there's different places on the web for people to go. And I think it's going back to your previous question about the lack of conventions and in-person things, it's also like the web like has also kind of leveled the playing field and allowed people from all over the world to do comics, where before, like with conventions, you were limited to who could attend the conventions, or back in the early days of comics, like most of the comics creators worked in New York, or now people can make comics from all over the world and can do it in the North American market. And it's kind of, especially with the web, it's kind of helped make it more diverse and creative, and allows all these different kinds of people to speak. And I think the pandemic came along at a unique time where the doing comics online wasn't perfected, but it was there enough that people could just say, well, the pandemic's here, it's not perfect, we're just going to do it the best we can. And they put it out there, and it can always improve later, but it kind of rushed along many things that were probably going to happen in the comics like industry, like 3, 4, 5 years down the line. That's all been expedited. Some rushed out before it's ready, but in some cases that's a good thing to kind of speed things along. And I think web and print kind of go together as not kind of a beginning and an end, but kind of going back and forth, especially in other countries outside of the US and Canada.
I also think that one, absolutely true, they dovetail completely, and you can't have a print comic and not have also the, have that comic accessible as digital. But as an artist, there's something really exciting about webcomics, where it's like there's no limit to the creativity. There's, I'm used to coming up looking at things in terms of, double page spreads. How does one page line up with the other page? How is the storytelling unfolding in this medium, right? I teach illustration, to students who are speaking fluent webcomics, and that is their goal. And for them, it's this. And we're learning a whole new style of page layout. And I've even seen, comics where it was programmed to be a choose your own adventure, where you're clicking to get to a next part of a story, and essentially it falls somewhere between comic and game. And I find that kind of innovation really exciting. And I think we're just right at the very beginning of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was, I brought up Homestuck because I think that was one of the first times I saw a webcomic that put music over certain scenes. And there was animation, things like animation. Yeah, so there seems to be, because we're able to, I guess, access all of these things on the internet, all of the other benefits of being on the internet anyway are kind of being implemented. You could be reading a webcomic and suddenly it's a game. And then you could have an album that one of your friends composed that belongs to one scene. There's Lore Olympus that kind of plays with that as well on webcomics. So yeah, or webtoon. So I'm very excited about this and understanding how it feeds into each other. Yes. Also, which of course is a huge topic, adaptations for things. So Heartstopper by Alice Oseman was picked up by Netflix for live action production. Of course, we have WandaVision, which has led Marvel to reprint their Scarlet Witch and Vision comics. It kind of seems as though when works are adapted to screen, they become not more popular, but they allow kind of fresh fans to see for the first time what maybe they thought they might not have been interested in. And then that building interest makes a bigger community for print. I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about that, about how adaptation kind of sparks interest in traditional sales.
I mean, definitely what we've seen is when you have a Netflix show of a graphic novel or series of graphic novels like The Old Guard or Umbrella Academy or The Boys, that has definitely galvanized sales, and a number of graphic novel publishers have emulated the book trade publishers the same way that when Hunger Games came out in the theaters, there was no way that there was not copies of Hunger Games in every Barnes and Noble. That book was not allowed to run out, to the point where, you know, I have a background in production as well, so I see these little differences. I could literally see the differences in cover treatments and say, okay, this was done at one printer, this was done at another printer, but they wanted to make sure this book was in stock. Marvel Comics actually operates differently, interestingly enough, where the demand has to present itself for them to go back to print on related books. So with WandaVision coming out, whether or not they were able to anticipate the interest, the widespread interest the story would have, they did not take the position of having books with these characters ready. They had the demand first, I guess, as some kind of metric for measurement. So different publishers handle it different ways, but definitely in the case of The Old Guard, those books were out there. Those sales ended up really practically doubling, getting to some record level, to the point where now there's going to be a sequel series. So that sequel series already has a built-in and expanded audience.
Yeah, that's incredible. Thank you. Yeah, I think because, of course, Marvel Endgame, the huge phenomenon. But what was really interesting is that people who, at least people that I knew, who had never been interested in comics went to see that because everyone was seeing it. And that sort of like, oh, I'm going to go with my friends. And then, oh, wait a minute, I'm actually kind of curious about this sort of movement allowed them to be like, okay, I want to read, I don't know, Iron Man, where do I start? And now you have all these, conversations happening where then I guess that interest will show the companies that it is worth reprinting those types of books or pursuing further projects. Yeah, I think it's very exciting.
Yeah, we've got
bouncing off. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Chris. It just seems like there are so many new readers that are coming in because of, people who would never have read The Watchmen or something like that. And then it's this, oh, I'm going to read that before watching the series. So whether it's Watchmen or Preacher, also, any of these shows, these are not comics that maybe this particular audience would have had any interest in. And in a weird way, it kind of feels similar, not just to the movies, but also to people starting to cosplay characters more and more, because I think that also kind of had this, I'm starting to cosplay these characters because of films and TV shows. I'm going to go and start reading about these characters' backstories as well. So all of these phenomena start to drive an audience that maybe would not have picked up a comic or didn't grow up with comics to come to the medium later. And, that's nothing but good.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like these adaptations, like the main point is to have a wider audience and to get more people and to have the accessibility. But even from like from comic to Hollywood, you also have like on the publishing side, you have like prose books to then comic book, and the goal is still the same. It's still very much like this, this book was a success, however, whenever that happened, but we want to still reach a wider audience that we think will enjoy this story. So we're going to try a different format. And I feel like you see that across the plate with, I mean, just like a variety of different things, but most of the times it's hugely successful because some people are, you know, they want to read comic books. They'd rather see the movie and then, you know, and then go look up, okay, so like, oh, who are these characters? Now I'm going to go do a deep dive and buy these whole collections of books and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, it's not just movies influencing comics. Like touching on something that Whitney said. Like there's also like there's kind of almost an official trend of podcasts being adapted into graphic novels. Like the Adventure Zone books are amazing. Several of the crime podcasts are being adapted into comics, like mostly as graphic novels. But I could speculate that they would do really well on something like Webtoon. So it's all kind of pooling into comics and just these popular stories that people want to read being turned into comics and drawn amazingly well, which is kind of like the magic of comics. It's this amazing art that tells these stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I think because we were talking before, and we were talking about how, like, of course, we're going to keep coming back to the adaptability of comics, but I really do think because it's such an interesting industry and that it's art and storytelling and it kind of plays into the two skill sets, there's a lot of instances where you get like that creative presence and it's manifesting in ways that, at least personally, I had not predicted at all. So it's always really exciting. I think especially relevant to 2020, we're seeing, I know we mentioned the fact that anyone can kind of create a comic today. And so what ended up happening, I think in this past year, is that we being the comic community, comic industry, really wanted to make sure that everyone could see themselves in stories. And so if anyone can make comics, then anyone can kind of develop a graphic novel or a story where they see themselves in that comic as characters. And I'm wondering, where are we seeing those types of stories develop, but also are we seeing which imprints are kind of coming out and dedicating their time to making sure that stories are, I guess, inclusive to the entire community?
Question. I know DC Comics launched a digital first series called Represent, which is semi-autobiographical stories of Black people. And the first one was penned by Christian Cooper, who had, you know, a serious, strangely life-threatening harassment incident at Central Park. And so usually, you know, companies that are proficient and are legacy companies dealing with fiction wouldn't necessarily engage autobiographical stories. Usually that you would see in the trade publishing houses. But the fact that they took that initiative, the fact that they made it digital first, allowed for a delivery immediacy to the audience, an audience that is now more engaged with their iPads, with their tablets, with their smartphones. And so bringing those real stories to the people was a definite example of how the industry pivoted so that more people could see stories about people like them. So it wasn't just using genre as a metaphor for that kind of visual identification. It was actually someone that you read about in the New York Times, someone that you saw on CNN. This is them using their story in the comic book medium.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know, I believe Abrams has Shirley Books, which is completely dedicated to the curation of LGBTQ stories. There was a really good article on different Black creators who are pursuing, instead of, I guess, simply pursuing editorial routes, they want to create their own imprints. So they go into the industry wanting to create their own imprints for that. Sara, I'm wondering if you want to talk about your project. Partially, I'm biased just because I'm curious, but also it might be a great time to do so.
So are you specifically curious about Los Pirineos or about Pirate Queens?
Oh, Pirate Queens.
Oh, cool. Okay. So I spent basically, so I started working on a book called Pirate Queens, The Dauntless Women Who Dared to Rule the High Seas, pretty much right before the pandemic began. So I've spent a year working on this book while quarantined. So the timing worked quite well because one of the things, you know, we were talking about changes and how creators are adapting. Part of it is reaching our audience, but part of it's also comics by their very nature are a pretty solitary act. We form group studios to keep from going insane, you know, but it tends to be pretty much, you know, tunnel vision and time with your cat and working, you know. So not for a good reason, but I did spend the whole year focused on this book. And so I'm really excited about it. It is a highly illustrated book about 6 different women from 6 different cultures who really existed, who were the most successful pirates in history. So it is, you know, essentially it's correcting the historical record in this really beautiful way. One of the queens, Ching Sheh, by every measure was the most successful pirate. The amount of booty, the amount of ships, she had, I believe, 1,800, the amount of men under her command. She lived to a ripe old age. The Emperor of China ended up having to negotiate with her and let her keep everything they stole. So there are these incredible stories about real women that all turned to piracy because society did not, you know, for whatever reason, their particular moment in time, they could not function in the role of, you know, that they had prescribed for them as a woman. And so most of them lived as men and carved out this other niche for themselves.
Yeah, I brought it up, A, again, because I was just curious, but also B, because I think it's a really good example of the way that graphic novels and comics are kind of able to draw inspiration from real life, which I think it's happening a lot right now with kind of fictionalized historical fiction, but also fiction that could easily happen tomorrow or yesterday. It's, yeah, we're like teaching each other things through this medium, which I don't know if you'd gone back like 10 years or 15, 20 years, maybe it wouldn't have been this active.
Right.
So I think it's a really, it's a really great moment.
Yeah, it is. And the amount of effort just on the Nat Geo side of making sure that everything was accurate, the amount of research that went involved, I mean, it's pretty incredible, honestly. So it's not just something where we're learning about real stories, but also, you know, all of the elements that are in it are things that you can really sink into, and it's meant for young people. So, you know, it's something where you can actually really learn about that time period and admire these incredible heroes.
Yes, so excited. It's a really great, it sounds like a really great project. I think specifically for storytelling or the transition, if you could say the changing tide of storytelling that we're seeing right now, are we seeing, I guess, a new theme arise? Are there new kind of genres that are forming right now? And if there are, and you're like very close to them, do you have any insight into why those types of stories are coming up now?
I mean, in my experience, I feel like for the book market specifically, it seemed to be everything was very contemporary, like contemporary middle grade, and still is. Contemporary middle grade is still like king of like the middle grade industry right now, especially with graphic novels. But because graphic novels continue to grow, because more publishers start graphic novel imprints, because there's more chances for authors to get to tell their stories, we're seeing different stories come in, we're seeing new stories come in, so that you can have like The Magic Fish, which is a story that has a contemporary element to it and is still a personal story for the author because he pulled stuff from his own life, but it also has fantasy, it also has these additional elements to it, and it's fictionalized in a way that's supposed to open it up for every reader to kind of connect with it. And it's one of those things where, like, I do feel like we're going to continue seeing stuff like that, seeing people be like, okay, well, so if contemporary is our foundation, what can we do? Let's get weird with it. Let's try these other things. But then you still get to see this growth in like high genre stuff. So like sci-fi, horror, fantasy, like just stuff that's true to that. I mean, I'm biased, but like I'm very excited to be in comics right now because I just feel like we have this great opportunity to see everything and to get to tell all different types of stories with all different types of creators, and that's been the most exciting thing for me as like an editor.
Yeah, going back on what you're saying, Whitney, and going to your question, Lauren, I don't think any new genres have emerged, but what's happened is genres that were dominant have become niche, and the other genres have, I won't say exploded because that implies um, growth over a short period of time, but it's really been gradual. So, when you talk about historical fiction, so I wrote a graphic novel for Humanoids, which takes place during the 80s, and it's called MPLS Sound. And it's really about the Minneapolis sound movement and about a Black woman trying to create a band that would eventually play with Prince. And even though that takes place between 1980 and 1982, those themes are the same themes of today, which is the tragedy, right? The tragedy is that we progress as a society so slowly that even when you're doing something in a different time period, it's still resonant. The same way that people say when you're writing science fiction, you're actually writing about the present disguised as the future. So my graphic novel is coming out in April. This month, Humanoids has one, which is basically a science fiction retelling of The Count of Monte Cristo, written by Ibrahim Mustafa, right? So the fact that you can have these different types of projects juxtaposed against one another, the fact that you can take a classic, reimagine it in modern times, reimagine it in a different genre, that kind of story flexibility, that's the kind of thing that comics can do in a way that no other medium can do it. Because if you say, take The Count of Monte Cristo and turn it into a science fiction story, if you do it in prose, that's one thing. If you do it in graphic novels, then the world is there, right? You don't have to imagine it. It is visualized for you. And then suddenly the conceit of taking a story from the past and bringing it into the present or the future is suddenly that much more possible, that much more immediate for an audience.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Chris, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I've been noticing the biography genre has kind of grown more mature, and it's less there's still kind of the documentarian take on biographies, but there's things like Sarah's project, and there's an upcoming Rosa Parks graphic novel that's really kind of using the artisticness of comics to really tell a story, and like not just tell the beginning, middle, and end, but kind of to have some I guess artistic license to it and use the form to tell more than just the Wikipedia entry of it, but to kind of tell it as a story and use the power of comics, like the way the March books did.
Yes.
Instead of it becoming just an anomaly, to have it become a fully formed part of the conversation. And you see all these modern biographies that 10, 20 years ago, just market-wise, just wouldn't have a place, like would never have been able to find the audience, but now it can.
Yeah, March is a great example. Also, I Am Alfonso Jones is another one. The Robin Hobb that I mentioned at the beginning, Almost American Girl. Like, there's it is something where it's taking a biography and it's not a straight story. It's not telling a straight story anymore. It's telling a story that only a comic book artist can, without trying to sound egotistical. But at least from my point of view, setting is a character. When I'm looking at any particular story, I personally spend a lot of time on background and background research, costume, and all of those details, culture, food, all of it, because I want all of those details to allow someone to immerse themselves and then to, really live in the world of that biography or that memoir, So I think, Chris, your point of just getting it, like, no, it's not about the straight story. It's about that particular, take on the story is really good. It is an incredible genre right now.
And really go into that, the genre is so unique that a number of people, when they made the decision to tell the story as a graphic novel, they had to teach themselves how to do graphic novels. That happened with Robin Ha. That also happened with T. Bui, who did The Best That We Can Do. These people taught themselves how to do graphic novels. So the graphic novels actually took time, but instead of taking the approach to say, well, I don't know how to do that, so that's not how I'm going to tell the story, they committed themselves to the best storytelling format and then developed the skills. And that really speaks to just how uniquely amazing and communicative and enthralling the comic book and graphic novel language is.
Yeah, I like to think of it as a tool, because we were having the conversation before, and it just feels as though, you don't have to be the best artist to tell a story through this medium. As long as you have the urge to tell the story, you can. You don't have to be the best writer. You can just use, the words that you know and the way that you know how to tell a story through this medium. So it seems to be very, very magical in that sense. And which makes a great transition, because I would love to talk about workflow. So of course, moving from an office to home, where you may not have all the materials that you had in the office, is challenging. Everyone has different roles here. I guess I would love to kind of understand what your workflow was before, and then maybe was there a central kind of challenge that you ran into? How was that addressed? How did you overcome it? Also, was there any big moment that seemed to be innovative that you think will be kept moving forward? Joe's the only one unmuted, so I'll bully in.
Oh, wow. Okay. I will say that Slack has really been an interesting ally, because there's always this side conversation that can happen with different departments. So in any given day at Heavy Metal, there will be Slack conversations with marketing, editorial, and upper management in one day at the same time. And that's on the side. So that's not interrupting the email flow. So those two different lines of communication are interesting. And one thing that happened, which I never would have seen coming, certainly coming from an office culture, is the idea that with so much Zooming, and no offense whatsoever to what we're doing here, because it's pretty amazing, but Zoom fatigue has made me more wanting of the analog phone call. So I actually am really enjoying phone conversations more. I mean, part of it is enjoying not having to get all dressed up for a Zoom conversation, but part of it is just, oh, okay, this doesn't have to be the only way we do it. I don't always have to look at a computer, and that's okay too, right? Just going back to a phone call is okay. So it's interesting how this enhanced digital communication has sometimes, made it necessary for us to go analog in some cases.
Oh man, I second and third that. My life as a professor has me doing a lot more Zoom and camera time and that sort of thing. But my life as an illustrator, I generally, most of my art directors and editors I speak to on the phone or have emailed with, but that predates pandemic, and that hasn't really changed. The one thing that changed was right at the very, when everything went down, suddenly I had a request for a Zoom with colleagues that I had never Zoomed with before, because I think that was what everybody was doing. But in reality, and in reality, you don't really need to do this, right? I need to send you my art. and I need to send you my script, and then I get a PDF back or something else that has some notes on it that I work from, and it's all, that's the flow. It's not usually going and meeting someone in person. I mean, that's what conventions are for, right? That's what panel discussions are for. You know, seeing you guys on the screen is seeing old friends, because I see you guys at panel discussions and conventions and gallery shows and that sort of thing. So what's really changed is, as a creator, you know, one, my group studio did, you know, unfortunately I had a group workflow, and because of it being a group workflow, that became something that was not sustainable. It just wasn't. Like, you can't have 13 people paying rent on a space you can't go to. It doesn't work. So the studio had to move to be a home studio, but the actual practice of making art stayed the same. You know, it just maybe was a little bit lonelier and didn't have the getting to go and say, like, let me stop by, you know, let me stop by such and such table and say hi, or, you know, let me go to this event and make sure I network with so-and-so. Like, that's the part that's missing. But as far as like the actual workflow, hasn't changed.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was going to second that, because I was clearly in the office. Like, my life was essentially office, apartment, office, apartment. And I used to have amazing work-life balance because they were two separate spaces. That is not the case anymore. But I would say, honestly, the biggest surprise for me was the fact that I could still do my job at home, because I feel like my entire career, people have always been like, editorial has to be in office, everyone has to be in office, you have to be in office, otherwise books don't get made. And so whenever like we're all packing our like plants and like going to our apartments, I was like, the industry's done, books can't get made, we're not in the office, like what's gonna happen? And then it's like, oh, literally that Monday, smoothest transition in the world, we could still do our jobs, we could still do everything we were going to. And granted, a lot of that was like PRH specifically knew that they were going to be sending everyone home, so they like did basically intense training for everyone to ensure that people knew how to use their computers and how to work digitally, because they knew that was going to be reliant. But like, there's things I miss, because like me and my publisher Gina Gagliano, we share an office, so I'd be working and it'd be like, oh, I have a question, turn my chair and be like, Gina, here's this question, and then just go back to work. Whereas now it's like, chat on Slack, is Gina on a phone call, is not on the phone call, do we have to have a Zoom meeting, do we have to do this? And so in some aspects, I feel like the communication I had with my colleagues and the people I work with directly takes a little longer than it did whenever I could just go to their desk. But as far as like actually completing my job and working with creators and making the books happen, I feel like it's actually been pretty seamless.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Chris?
I'm very privileged. I've worked from home since the early 2000s, and I grew up on AIM and BBSs and all that stuff. But like for me, with the pandemic, I haven't been able to go to conventions and travel. And as what Sarah was saying before, is most all comics creators, like the creators themselves, they don't work in offices. They work from home, like all over the United States, Canada, Mexico, and everywhere. So comics conventions, especially in the kind of the after hours, the before hours, before it's open to the public, it's like that first day of school before classes start, where no one's seen each other in a couple months and everybody's running into each other. There's like this contact high of just all these people you haven't seen or that you only see at conventions. And as a journalist that kind of sits on the fence, like if I'm in the comics industry or just reporting on it, that kind of allows these connections to be made that are hard to make over email and Slack and Zoom calls, that or just have to have connections that level up by in-person meetings. Like, I've known Joe for years, but it's not until I happened to be in New York and I knew his offices were just down the street, and I met up with him, and he showed me this amazing burger place that he says is a secret, so I can't tell anybody.
Darn it, that was the whole point of this panel, Chris.
There you go. God, I pray they're still open. I pray
Yeah.
when things get to the other side, we can go back to that burger place.
Yeah, but just having that hour kind of leveled up, well, at least on my side, kind of leveled up our connection to understand who he is, like how his process is for thinking, and kind of helped this online relationship more. And with these lack of conventions, I haven't really found a substitute for that connection buildings. Like when I go to a convention, I normally have like a full like little like booklet of like notes and stuff like that. Some are stories, some are just ideas, and some are just conversations that makes me think of things that I'm still like reaping the benefit of like years from now. Like I'm still like, I visited DC's offices in 2019, and I'm still working on notes from that about ideas from that in-person kind of thing. So the pandemic has kind of stymied me for that.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. I was really passionate about that question because I feel as though, again, yeah, certain sections of the industry don't require you to be in the office 24/7. Then again, I feel like creators, introverted and extroverted, there are just certain sections where you feel as though you're losing something, specifically as someone who likes attending conventions personally. If you are an indie creator, Artist Alley is like one of the main places that I'm finding new artists. Like I have a cup that is like overflowing with cards because that's where I get all my, business cards from those creators. And so how to know how those artists are able to connect with the readers was really imperative, because of course that's not something that we want to lose as we're not able to meet up. Though, our hopes are high and I will stay positive for attending conventions. I'm going to dip into the Q&A because we have about 10 minutes and we have some good questions, I think addressed to everyone. What is the most challenging aspect of working with comics in your personal experience?
Whoa.
I'll jump in.
Okay, go, Sarah.
Yeah, the most challenging aspect of working on comics is finishing working on the comic. It really is. It's people, you never can, and this is the conversation I'll have with students too, where it's like, okay, why don't we start with like 8 pages and see how you do, right? Let's not start with 108 pages. But the hardest thing is really being able to look at the entire scope of the project and see it for what it is. And then so recently an artist I really dig, John Hendricks, incredible illustrator, and he posted this image that is entitled The Pit of Despair. And I bought a print of this because it's the pit of despair and embarking on the long project. And it's a visual representation of your emotional journey when you conceptualize a project, and then, the ratio between the amount of time it takes you and the quality of the work and how you're feeling about the work. And so you kind of have to just understand this is going to take you a year. You're going to do this amount, pages, have to plan it out, and then also have to have that like emotional preparedness for how hard the actual work is of getting the project done and done beautifully. It takes a lot of time. And there is definitely a point where, about 2/3 of the way through, where you're just pulling your hair out and it's like a scene from a horror movie, and then you get over it and then it's a good project, but the hardest part of comics is just making the thing.
Yeah, definitely. I know for me and working with creators, it's an art form, of course, but we're putting these things out on schedules. These schedules are predetermined. There are a lot of other things writing on these schedules. There are marketing campaigns. There are librarians. There are bookstore appearances. And so the reconciliation of working with people and asking them to do their best and asking them to bring their love to it, but then also having to enforce a schedule is a really weird position to be in on a regular basis. And part of what that involves is creating schedules that account for chaos, right? So you have to allow for that buffer. You have to allow for someone getting sick. You have to allow for someone having an off day because we're human, and sometimes someone wakes up and they just don't have it, right? And you have to allow for that. But you know, where art meets commerce in these things, and having to manage that in a way that you represent the company that you work for, and that you can also apply the consideration and empathy to the creators. That is the ongoing struggle from my point of view.
Yeah, I'm going to second this, where it's for me, it's how long it takes to make a graphic novel happen. So this kind of goes in both what Joseph's saying and Sarah's saying, is graphic novels take a long time to make. So hopefully you are excited about it at the very beginning, because if you're not excited at the beginning, you're definitely not going to be excited at like the halfway point, or whenever you hit that pit of despair journey, which everyone does. It's natural. It's okay if it happens. But the hardest part is, like, it's all worth it in the end, and you know it's going to be worth it, but you can't account for life things happening. You don't know when there's going to be a personal thing happening. You don't know when a pandemic is going to happen and how that might affect the schedule and the creation of a book. There's just so much stuff that you have to plan around while you're planning like a 2-year schedule. It's like, can I see the future? No, I can't see the future, but I'm going to be hopeful that this works. And sometimes you're lucky and sometimes you're not.
Really great from my point of view to hear both of you guys talking about like the amount of thought you put into the empathy for the person that's making the work, and like how much of a relationship it is between editorial and the creators, and to be able to produce these pieces, because it's a labor of love for a very long time.
And that's the only way, you know, it's going to work. And you know what that really speaks to is, I think the average person who admires art but is not an artist, they underestimate the process of creating art. Underestimate time, labor. They don't see all the rejected versions. They don't see a rejected version of a page. They don't see the first draft of a script. They don't see what ends up on the cutting room floor, right? That's all the dirty stuff. Right. So before you get to that finished book or story, there's a whole process that led to that. And so it's not magic. It's not drop water every 22 days. I get a Batman story. That's to be able to pull that off across a line month after month after month, or what Whitney's saying, the 2-year project, right? Where you're living with one story for a long amount of time. And it would be perfectly human to say, yeah, I'm sick of this story. Like sometimes this story is causing me agony, or like I really have to do another draft. You have to persevere, you know, but I think that's part of it. So I think that's why the empathy, because it's not magic, it's science. It's skill that is forged and reinforced and practice. And we tend to use the word gift, and in a way it is, because 3 people could go through an instructional process and come up with 3 different styles. But that's work to maintain an artistic standard, to maintain a writing standard, to maintain a coloring standard in such a competitive field. That is labor.
Yeah, no, everyone deserves respect in this industry, because yes, Sarah, definitely a labor of deep love and passion, because I know, I mean, whenever there's a big change like this, which is partially why we're doing the panel anyway, it's good to analyze how we overcame that, because, you know, we're used to things being a certain way. And when we get to see how people were able to overcome it, you know, we can learn from this, and hopefully, I don't know, like Joe was saying, like phone calls again, or misconventions, which I didn't even think of, the phone call thing. But yeah, let us see. Oh, so there is a question about what's on your wish list to work on as a creator, or on your wish list to acquire?
I want to hear Whitney's answer first before I say it. I want to hear your answer first.
Your expression, you gave it away. No poker face.
I mean, so for Random House Graphic, our motto is we want to have a graphic novel on every bookshelf, and so that means a graphic novel for every type of reader, whether it's nonfiction, sci-fi, whether it's like YA readers or young readers or middle grade. Like, we want to have a little bit of everything. So like my wish list is books that I don't already have, which is a very hard ask when I talk to people about it, because I'm like, I know what I have, you don't know what I have, so now we're going to play this game of figuring out what can make it work. But that is the projects that we're looking for. Is like we really do want to achieve that goal, which will take time, but that's what our goal is.
Yeah. Sarah?
Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, so I actually got a wish recently, so I'll share it. So I have been working for several years on a collaborative project called Los Pirineos, the Mostly True Memoirs of Esperancita Gómez. And I've released small chapterlets as part of a pitch. And our book just was acquired by Lee and Low Books. So thank you. So I'm going to be getting to work on my dream project for the next 2 years. And it is a story about my family's immigration from Colombia to the US. It's a memoir mixed with magical realism. So it kind of falls directly into that genre that Chris was speaking about. But that is my dream project, and that's what I'm excited to work on, and I'm getting my wish.
I love that. I deeply love that. Also, just because I want to make sure that people in the audience know, Sarah, people are wondering about when your Pirate Queens project will be out.
So it's due out next winter. So it was pushed back. Their publishing cycle was pushed back by, I think, 1 season. So it should be out January of next year.
You heard it here first, or probably 8th, but at least in a panel, you heard it here first. Cool, great. Well, yeah, we have about a minute left. I want to ask specifically, Chris, if there's a project that you would like to see happen, because I know you do a lot of coverage, and I know that you're like the king of articles that are informative about this. So I'm wondering if you're seeing things you would like to see something happen.
Personally, there's a book publisher in Europe called Shortbox. They do some amazing work. She is the publisher behind it. It's this real tastemaker, and she doesn't have the setup to do big print runs and widely published stuff, but she is consistently finding materials and creators and work that is just amazing. It's kind of like the sneak preview of how great comics could be like 5-10 years from now. So I'd like for, I don't know, someone to win the lottery or some book publisher to kind of figure out a way to foster the taste making that's done there at Shortbox and those creators, but also the person behind it to kind of hoist them up so they can use their talents to kind of get that where everyone can get it. Because like even I, as a journalist that's connected, it's like a mail order to get it through, which is nice to have this tactile book in your hands. But that's just the main thing that I wish would be exalted up and made mainstream.
Yeah, well, I think if anyone were to have hope, it's definitely us. We've reached the time limit, which breaks my heart because this is so much fun. Thank you guys for being here. I feel like we are friends now, which is
definitely.
We're friends, no takebacks.
But yeah, thank you. Karen?
I just want to pop in and thank all of you. Lauren, it was really, I know how much hard work went into all of this. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your passion, your insights, your hard work, and your magic. It was really wonderful. And I'm just seeing all the happy responses coming up in the chat. And you got a lot of people very excited out there tonight. So thank you. Also, I just would ask everybody to mark their calendars. Our next meeting is April 13th, and we're going to be exploring the relationship between publishers and subscription book companies. So I think it's going to be another very interesting evening, and we would love to have you all join again. And if you do, please come early for the social thing, because then we can just expand our friendships and relationships. And so thank you again, all very, very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful.
Can everyone give Lauren a high five? Like I feel like
Oh yeah,
Oh,
please.
yeah.
Please.
That's fair. Yeah, for putting this together, bringing us together.
Now it's complete. Now it's definitely complete.
Yeah.